Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started.
So, in a few days is the WWDC 2017 keynote, followed by a week of sessions, and we are going to learn all sorts of new stuff. It is very likely that we will get announcements of basically the next major versions of all the Apple OSs. We're going to have iOS, Mac OS, Watch OS, maybe even tvOS if they remember that that's a product, and it's probably all going to dominate our summertime, and probably for release in the fall, so that we're all going to have the typical Apple summer season as a developer. And I'm looking forward to this. From the little bits and pieces of rumors here and there, it seems like there's a good chance of this being a pretty big year. And I think we're going to spend this episode talking about kind of, not necessarily predictions, but kind of just things that we want out of these new releases from a developer point of view. Does that sound good?
Yeah, because it is. I always go into WWDC week with like this interesting combination of excitement and terror. Because on the one hand, it's exciting as a developer this is the time when, in general, all the new stuff comes out. And it's certainly the time when the most new stuff comes out. Recently, they've gotten into a pattern where there's some new stuff, maybe in like early part of the year, like February or so, but mostly this is it. And, this in some ways dictates the trajectory that my apps will go on for the next year at least. And so it's exciting, but it's also a bit terrifying because who knows what's going to come out? Are we going to have some big, it's like one of these new features or design overhauls or something where there's a tremendous amount of busy work that I need to do this summer to just update all my apps to do something new that's now like the new way to do it? Or is there going to be some new opportunity, some new, a lot of my business is built around the fact that, Apple sometimes introduces new APIs that create opportunities. And, should I be spending my whole summer, diving into getting those done? So it's like there's a bit of a tension there, but it's overall I'm excited. I'm really, looking forward to going to San Jose next week and to just seeing what Apple has in store. Because it's always a good show at the very least. Like I always enjoy the actual process of discovering this, whether or not it ends up making my summer nice or not so nice.
So what is? I guess we could probably do a little bit unstructured here because who knows what there's going to be exactly. Yeah. What's like the biggest thing you're expecting to be different this year or to be announced for a developer point of view?
It seems like the big areas that are being rumored to be talked about are around the SiriKit stuff and around, I would say, productivity stuff generally, especially on the iPad.
Sounds about right.
Like those things seems to be like those are going to be if I had to guess, the broad themes of WWDC, because there's often kind of a theme, and sometimes there's a marketing theme, something that you'll see in the morning, and sometimes there's a technical theme that you'll see in the afternoon, like in the in the State of the Union keynote, like the thing that they sort of start to move and focus on. Like I'm remembering there was the technical theme. It was all about flexible layout. And, surprise, surprise, we got different size iPhones that fall. So often there's this kind of this undercurrent on the technical side that I always try and keep an eye on. But I think the two overarching features that we're going to be kind of hit with a lot are going to be, SiriKit stuff and then, iPad stuff and productivity stuff generally, like trying to kind of hit that stuff. Because it seems like both of those things are the areas where there's the most overdue opportunities. Like there's lots of things that Apple could do. Like there's always these APIs and these things that I'm sure they could introduce and push forward with. But I think those are the areas where what they don't have now feels like a hole, like something they need to fill back in and to catch up. And so I would expect that that's where they've been putting the majority of their efforts, for the last year or so.
Yeah, I would, just selfishly, as the developer of Overcast, I would love for them to add more SiriKit intents, because chances are one of the ones they would add would probably be some kind of audio library app kind of thing, so that you could have, so you could say things like, hey, name of assistant, play the latest episode of Under the Radar in Overcast, and have it actually be able to send my app that command in a structured fashion, and have my app be able to expose its catalog in such a way that it can do the recognition for me and say exactly which show or exactly which episode should be played. But that's a lot to build. And so it makes a lot of sense why that wasn't there last year in kind of like the 1.0 version of these features. But that's something that I really would expect to be added, pretty far up the priority list. So probably this year, because it's a very, very demanded thing. It is possible, as we speculated a little bit last year, that maybe Apple intentionally didn't want to do that because they wanted to protect and boost Apple Music and give it like exclusive Siri access. But I think that's less likely than the other explanation, which is they probably just didn't have time to do it yet. And so we'll see what happens this year. But if that happens, that's a game changer. Because basically, SiriKit is really, really cool for 7 kinds of apps. And if your app does not do one of those 7 things, you have nothing that you can do with SiriKit. So I'm hoping that any broadening of SiriKit is potentially great for lots of people. Anything that can expand it to more types of apps, whether it's my app specifically or any others. I just want to see movement there. I want it to not just be a thing that they release once and then never expand again. I want this to be every year there's some kind of new SiriKit availability or new intent types that make this thing more useful for more kinds of apps. And I think that's very likely to be the case.
Yeah, and I also am curious to see if they continue down the path of the way they structured the intent system in iOS 10, where it's very rigid and prescribed. You can do these following things, and what's awkward with that, and what I kind of I'm curious to see with how they handle it, is if they expand that massively, the number of constants that SiriKit is going to have, it would just kind of seem like it might get out of control. If it's if it's not this just sort of general purpose thing that you have to specifically it's you have these categories and subcategories, and it gets very structured. They can do that. It reminds me in some ways of HealthKit, where they have just hundreds of different sample types and details that you can set on everything, and it kind of works there. But with SiriKit, I wonder if that's where they would go, because it seems slightly unwieldy and kind of limiting. But I also, on the flip side, I also think of things for example, if they will head down the road of doing things in a slightly more OS-driven approach, I could also see. For example, Overcast integrates currently with CarPlay, which means that it exposes its catalog in a machine readable format to the phone, and CarPlay gives you commands in and out in order to control it. And I start to wonder if that's a slightly different approach to taking that thing. And if you implement CarPlay, you could integrate with SiriKit, because theoretically that information is available to it. And so I wonder if it's a slightly different approach, rather than pushing all of those details of what can Overcast do? It's it has an intent for playing. Does it have need to have a separate intent for pausing, for next, for adjusting speeds? How detailed are they going to go into that? Just in the SiriKit side versus plugging in other places, and I don't know. I've played around a little bit with SiriKit. I have an integration in Pedometer ++ where you can use it to start a walking workout on an Apple Watch. Which was one of the few intents that, of all the intents that were possible, that was one of the main ones that I could do. I don't know if that's used very much, because I think the biggest struggle I have with Siri in general and with SiriKit is Siri itself needs to be would need, at least for my own use, you would need to be a more fundamental part of how I interact with my iOS devices or my Apple ecosystem generally. For it to make sense, because right now it's much easier for me to just raise my wrist, tap the complication, and then tap start walk. That's much more straightforward and is going to work every time. So my hope is that if they're going to go down the road of expanding SiriKit, that they are, it has to, I think, be, come along with much broader improvements to Siri in general to make it a place that we're hanging out, so that interacting with apps in there, makes sense as well. Or if it doesn't, we'll just sort of end up with the iMessage app situation where it's like there's this thing and it's theoretically very powerful, but in practical use, it's not very widely used. And so, as a developer, putting much time and effort into it, like I made a couple iMessage apps when it first launched. I don't think I'm going to be probably putting a lot more work into there, because I don't hear from a lot of customers that they use it or have feature requests or issues. And even in my analytics, they're not used too much. And so if Siri ended up going down that same road, that would be kind of disappointing and a little frustrating to have this new capability, but it's in this place that no one goes because it's awkward, or they don't know how to do it, or it doesn't work often enough to be reliable.
Because that's always the big unknown whenever Apple releases some kind of brand new territory or brand new type of thing you can do or brand new app store. You never really know, and they don't even really know. Is this going to be a thing or not? I think early on there was an assumption that a brand new app store would always be a thing, because the early ones were pretty big because there was all this pent up demand and a lot of low hanging fruit. And then over time, as they've broadened and they've made a lot more specialized capabilities and specialized app stores and more specialized platforms like the TV and the watch, and then the last year they added the iMessage app store, and I think what we've seen from a lot of these is it's when it launches, it's a big unknown, and then afterwards a lot of them just kind of don't go very far, or they go far but only for very narrow app types, like on the TV, you have video apps, video playback apps, and you have basically a handful of games that are decent on it, but not much else. When they demo these things, they show here's a real estate app and a shopping app and all these different things that you can do on your TV, but then most people don't actually do those things. Same thing with messages, where you can make a really complex advanced app for iMessage, but most people aren't doing that. Most people aren't using those, and most people aren't finding those or looking for those. Most people are just using the built-in stuff and maybe some stickers. And so it's you don't know that when they launch it. You kind of have to take a risk with some of these new categories, because as we talked about before, there is potential upside if you bet on the right horse, and if they open up something new that ends up being awesome and really taking off. And if you're there early, you have a huge advantage. And so to kind of move this on a little bit, one thing that I'm a little bit excited about tentatively is that over the last couple of releases, they've added, in each OS, they've added extremely specialized extension types that basically make sense for one app or one kind of app and nothing else. So this would be things like the Safari Content Blocker extension, or what they introduced last year, phone call blocking extensions. And what this enables is basically these highly specialized things. They enable one kind of app, but those one kinds of apps are usually game changers for certain people who need that. I was having a huge robocall spam problem, phone call spam. It's getting out of control in recent years for a lot of people, and it was hitting me hard. And ever since call blocking extensions came out last year, I've had a massive weapon against this. Similarly, the content blockers before that, before Safari content blockers, my whole peace drama aside, before content blockers, there was no good way to control ads or privacy or data usage in mobile Safari. And with one extension point that they made, that then became possible and actually fairly easy to do. So kind of unspecifically, what I'm looking forward to this year is to just see what other kinds of weird little extensions are they going to add to the system, because those always enable new kinds of apps or brand new types of features and apps that you could never do before, and that's always exciting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I always love playing the game of trying to guess what those things are. And I think one thing that I was thinking about recently is it seemed kind of odd that Apple is never it's not odd, but it's noteworthy that Apple has never done any integrations with the Mail app.
Yeah,
on the iPhone.
It doesn't even use the share sheet yet.
Yeah, it's very locked down. And understandably in a lot of ways that letting a third-party app have access to your email is a complicated thing. I mean, obviously at the same time, it's people you give your third-party apps access to all of your photos, which are, in some ways just as a personal,
right. Or all of your phone calls, or all of your or all of your web browsing activity. Like, and the way Apple designs these extension points to protect people's privacy. Like, a call blocking extension is not notified on every call it receives. All it does is provide Apple a block list when it's asked to, and then Apple actually enforces it. Same thing with Safari content blockers, where the content blocker is not itself getting a feed of all the URLs you're visiting and returning yes or no on all of them. It is, again, simply supplying like block patterns in a block list, and the system is doing the enforcement for it. So it has no insight into your activity. So if they wanted to do something with mail extensions, which I love that idea, they could do things more like that, where what you can do as the extension provider is limited in a way that protects user privacy very well.
Yeah, because I doubt we would end up with something that's like the mail kit that's the equivalent of like photo kit or something, where you can you can read all of someone's email, you can send emails on their behalf. They've created APIs for that for other content types, but email seems a little much. And of course, as a result, all of the third-party email apps on iPhones, they all need all of your credentials and information, and there's a whole other issue there potentially, but it's an area certainly that I think that I could see them going into. And in some ways it speaks to the maturity of the platform, that there aren't that many other areas that I can think of that are sort of the obvious new extension points.
Yeah.
They've done a really, it's kind of crazy if you just for fun go into Xcode and open the add extension panel in Xcode.
It's so long now.
It's so big. There is so much stuff that you can do in there.
And there's stuff that that you forget that you can even do. There's stuff that they mentioned once in a keynote 2 years ago, and you forgot about it an hour later, and you get there oh wow, that's right, I can build this thing. That's crazy.
Oh sure. It's crazy now. Even just when I'm building some of my apps, the number of targets that are included, and you have to it's gotten a lot better. But I'm dealing with code signing and things with these things where now you have 6 or 7 different target things that you need to deal with and manage. And in some ways, you always hope that maybe they'll do something on the tooling side to improve that. But overall, I'd say this extension approach that they've taken since whenever that in iOS 8, maybe whenever this came, it seems like it's been a big win in terms of they've created this mechanism by which you can create logic and have it tie into different parts of the OS. In a way that is fairly reliable, is fairly isolating, and doesn't require your main app, for example, to be running all the time in the background, which I would expect would have battery life concerns. You can add a widget to your app that just sits there and it's only active whenever the widgets are shown, but it doesn't necessarily and it doesn't fire up your main process and do all that kind of stuff. You can build these really focused, detailed things. And yeah, so I would expect and hope we would kind of add a few more extension points. But it is funny to think at what point do they run out of those? Do they run out of the obvious and impactful extension points? And I don't think we're there yet, certainly, but it is certainly something that iOS is turning 11 or whatever it is. It's getting old. It's heading off to high school now. It's it's well in its way to adolescence. So maybe we'll have some awkward puberty kind of growing pains kind of situations. But
I think that was iOS 7.
That was iOS 7. Was its
it started early, but
yeah.
that was definitely its awkward phase.
Yeah. But it does feel like it's more mature. In some ways, it reminds me of the Mac, right? At what point does iOS have that kind of stability in capability that the Mac has right now? And I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I think we're certainly getting closer to there.
Yeah, we're certainly closer to that than to the beginning. But if they actually do the semi-rumored things about, promoting the use of files and inter-app communication and data sharing, kind of rethinking some of that file and document model in iOS, that also could enable all sorts of new types of apps and all sorts of advances to existing apps. That could be a huge change to the OS, and especially from the user point of view. And that, just even if we could do a certain thing before, if it's now like way easier for people to do, that alone can change markets and can change what kind of apps people can practically make and sell and survive from. So that is all very promising, like if any of that stuff happens. But we'll see. Anyway, we were sponsored this week by Dice. Dice has been helping tech professionals advance their careers for more than 20 years with the tools and insights needed to give you an edge when you're looking for a new job and managing your career. The Dice Careers mobile app is the premier tool to manage your tech career from anywhere. With thousands of positions from top companies, you will find exactly what you're looking for with the Dice Careers mobile app. And if you're wondering what's next in your career, Dice's new career pathing tool can help you learn about new roles based on your job title and skills. And they can even show you which skills you will need to make the next move. And the Dice Careers Market Value Calculator allows you to understand what your skills are worth. You can discover your market value based not only on your job title and location, but also your specific skill set. So don't just look for a job, manage your tech career with Dice. Download the Dice mobile app and learn more at dice.com/undertheradar. Our thanks to Dice for sponsoring this show and all of Relay FM. So there's also, in addition to like big things in iOS, I'm also just kind of looking forward to the SDK changes. Every year there's some kind of new SDK, new API, new UI kit widgets and stuff that make things better or easier or enable new uses. And I'm always looking forward to this, especially because this year there is these rumblings of a mid-level redesign happening system-wide. And that usually comes with some cool new widgets and stock controllers and things like that as well. And kind of the design trend that's in right now involves things, and this is kind of what I tried to do with Overcast, but involves things that kind of look like Apple Maps right now, where you have these sliding sheets and everything's kind of curvy and everything's kind of it slides up with depth but not translucency, and these kind of moving around these swiping cards. And doing this with stock UI kit now is a lot of manual work. It's a lot of custom work. And so if they are redesigning the OS to be more like that, I would love to see SDK to basically make that stuff easy and standard, to have this is now your UI card controller or whatever they would call it, and have stuff like that happen. Because if you're designing an app today that you want to feel new and modern, that's the kind of stuff you have to do. And if they build it in, it becomes way easier, and it standardizes the implementations so they all feel the same and they all work the same, which is better for everybody. So I'm very much looking forward to the potential of that.
Yeah, and I think too, I always am hopeful for them to find the areas that are these little pain points. That these aren't things that would even. They're not going to show up on the keynote. They're not going to show up even at the State of the Union. These are just these little pain points that they can alleviate. In some ways, it makes me think of some of my favorite changes are ones where I can remove a third-party library or dependency from my app.
Love that.
And just instead switch over to using theirs. I think of things like a blocking progress HUD, which is something that most apps at some point need to integrate, because you have some part of your app where you need to say you need to block the user from doing things while you do some operation that takes a little bit of time, and that's there is no built-in UI way to do that, and so you end up with hundreds of different third-party versions of that, or you can build your own and add 101st, or I think of things like all the wrappers that exist around keychain access, and it makes me think when are we going to get just a nice clean interface that's not based on all the old low level C stuff that we end up because ultimately I always just one of my first includes is I include a wrapper for keychain because I'm going to need to store credentials and sensitive data somewhere, and doing it the other way, it isn't so much that I can't, it's that I worry about doing it wrong. That the whole point is that this is sensitive data and I want to do it properly, and so I end up using a wrapper. It's I'd love to see little things like that, these little bits of API that just make things better. And then I think you're saying, if they have a direction they would like developers to head from a UI perspective, making it so that in the same way that you have to build it yourself, it's much better if it's built in, because that, especially, I would say they've gotten a lot better too of when they do introduce new stuff like that, they make it extensible to a degree that you can still kind of make it your own and tweak it and customize it and hack around it less, in a way that, like, collection views, for example, are way more extensible, like sometimes in ways that make them hard to understand, but they're way more extensible than, a UI table view was. And I think that's a lesson that they seem to be learning around making, when they add a new bit of UI like that, they make it really extensible so that everybody can use it and then everybody can benefit from it. And I think more importantly, so that then customers and users of iPhones have a much more consistent experience, that, you don't have these weird edge cases or like, well, in this one I do this and it just feels different, or even just like the physics of it, like the way it slides up and down is different. And anytime you have those differences, like, that's not as good as if every app kind of gets the same thing, and then every app can benefit from it as it improves over time.
I actually did have on my list here, will this be the year that they finally resolve the table view / collection view discrepancy in some way? Probably by either making table view like a special collection view subclass, or just by deprecating table view and and just kind of adding things to collection view layouts that can make that easy to do. But I would love to see some motion there. I would also, on my rest of my hit list here, it's pretty quick. I would love to see the system-wide dark mode that's been rumored forever. That could be nice to have, and to have like kind of a system toggle, kind of like the dynamic text toggle, where you can just make your app respond to that, and you don't have to build UI for that. And then my stretch goal here is, it has seemed like in the last year or two, like fairly recently, Apple has kind of revitalized the Mac in some way, and started putting a lot of big effort behind the Mac again. I would love to see, and I'm not asking for UI kit on the Mac. That's a big stretch, and I know there's lots of reasons why that will probably never happen, and some of them are even good reasons. But I would like to see the needless distance between AppKit and UI kit reduced.
Sure.
So, because there's so many classes that are similar, but just different for minor or legacy reasons, like NS color versus UI color, NS image versus UI image, things like that are just kind of like needlessly different. I would love to see just, let's reduce some of those differences. Let's get some kind of indication here of uniting these two platforms on some level, just to make it a little bit less painful to work between them, and to kind of then encourage more Mac development. I would love to see that. That's kind of a stretch goal of mine, but I'm not sure how realistic that is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say it's one of these things that seems to be a slow march towards that, where most APIs now, that like all of the new stuff, if it's on both platforms, it tends to be fairly consistent across both platforms. And it's like whether they will go through the work of slowly kind of undoing some of the older stuff to make it more consistent, and exactly how they do that, who knows? But it is definitely something that it feels like this kind of awkward thing that all of the modern, or I don't know, modern is probably the wrong word, all of their new platforms are UI kit based, in terms of the watch, the iPhone, and tvOS. It's not that they're like, they don't use UI kit necessarily, but they all seem to live in that family and use UI colors, and none of it's based on the Mac stuff. And it feels like then the Mac becomes the odd man out, that you can have a library now that you could use across all of their platforms except the Mac. And that odd man outness is definitely something that I think would be great for them to resolve.
Yeah, and it's hard because, a part of the reasons why the Mac has different stuff is because in many cases it can do a lot more. Like, it has to accommodate more use cases or more, configuration options or things like that. But I think that there are ways to resolve this, and I think it would be really nice for the entire ecosystem, including Apple's internal development, if this was resolved. All right, any closing thoughts? I'm looking forward to next week. We are going to be doing a live show at CocoaConf next door. We're happy to see anybody next week. We really look forward to, if you see us and you want to come up and say hi, please do. We love that. Don't feel bad or guilty or awkward. Please just come up and say hi. And any closing thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is, I would say, I'm looking forward to next week. I always enjoy, it is a rare thing to, I love meeting listeners. I love running into people who have, listen to the show or, know what I do. And WWDC week is always, it's a special week because it's the one week where the people around me actually know that, actually like care about what I care about. And if anything, it's going to be kind of interesting because I get the impression that we're going to kind of take over downtown San Jose. It'll just be developers as far as the eye can see, which is kind of exciting in some ways, that we'll just kind of, everyone around me will be interested in the same stuff.
Well, we're out of time, so thank you for listening, everybody, and we will see you, maybe literally some of you, next week.
Bye.